In the spotlight, a new Chinese stealth fighter jet. At least that's what it appears to be. Welcome to this News Hub Extra. I'm Simon Constantman. Joining me on the set, we've got Rebecca Blumenstein, foreign editor with the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
So this is what appears to be a new fighter jet. What do we know about it?
Well, over the past few days, online on some defense-related sites, a picture of China's stealth fighter, one that's been rumored to be under development, have emerged. And what's interesting is that the fighter is kind of taxiing for takeoff, and this has defense experts really buzzing, and they view it really as one of the first authentic looks at how much progress the Chinese have been making.
And this is part of what's assumed to be a Chinese military buildup. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is likely to heighten sensitivities about China's military buildup. Really, the U.S. is the only country that has an operational stealth fighter at this point. So if the Chinese were to succeed here, it could really alter the balance of power in Asia.
Now, what do we know about this stealth fighter? I know that you know, these things are kept very secret by governments, and in fact not a lot is known about our own stealth fighters, but what do we know about this one, or what do we almost know?
Well, there's a lot that we don't know. It's probably several years from being operational. The Chinese are still believed to be behind the Russians, but it seems that it's taking off, and that is a significant step for the Chinese. And immediately this could make it harder for the U.S. to defend Taiwan, for example, if the Chinese are making significant progress here. It also comes just as the Chinese are getting very serious about deploying an aircraft carrier, and so it's really going to just rekindle concerns about China's military buildup.
Now, just to back up a bit, a stealth fighter is one that can fly without being picked up by radar because of the smooth surfaces. Is this expected to be better or equal to anything the U.S. has, or are we still way ahead?
Well, it's interesting. This is actually coming out just a week before Defense Secretary Robert Gates is due to go to Beijing, so I'm sure this may be discussed there. The U.S. is coming out with a new version of its own stealth fighter, so I would expect that the U.S. will certainly be ahead of this in this race for a long time. But if the Chinese are even playing the game here, that's quite significant. Okay,
so I guess this will be keeping people quite busy in the Pentagon and in the White House and with the Secretary of State as well, and the Secretary of Defense too.
I would imagine. I mean, it's important to say that we don't know exactly how much progress they've made, but these photos are, and no one quite knows how they came out. They haven't really been censored within China, which is interesting within itself. So we know that Pentagon officials are looking at them and analyzing them and taking them seriously.
And China has been flexing its muscles, certainly with its navy in the South China Sea, with certain sort of territorial disputes in waters. Is this an inauspicious moment for sort of peace within the Asia area?
Certainly. I mean, this has been a year where China has been growing increasingly aggressive. We've seen it in disputes with Japan and the South China Sea on a number of fronts, increasing tensions with India, and it's really prompting a realignment of much of Asia. So this kind of confirms people's fears about a military buildup in China.
Maybe their worst fears.
Perhaps.
I think we'll be talking with us about this for a long time to come, maybe the next few months. Thank you very much, Rebecca Blumenstein of the Wall Street Journal. I'm Simon Constable, and this is the Wall Street Journal Digital Network.
It's kind of a stunning revelation, or apparent revelation in the media, that the Chinese have a stealth fighter. At least they have pictures of a stealth fighter. Brett Stevens, our Global View columnist, do they have a stealth fighter?
Well, that's an important distinction, and it's worth raising. We've had photographs of what appears to be a stealth fighter taxiing at high speeds down a runway. We're told that it might actually take off sometime later this week. It's probably not going to be fielded for another decade, but it does sort of provide a picture of a rising Chinese military power, rising technological capabilities that are potentially capable of challenging us on their side of the Pacific.
And with this fighter in particular, even if it takes off, I would imagine, or maybe it would, the real test would be, is it invisible to our radar, to our surveillance systems? Well, are we going to be able to tell, or are we going to rely on China News Agency or something of that nature?
We probably won't really understand this fighter until we get our hands on one. You know, in the early 1970s, when the MiG-25 Foxbat came out, it sort of looked like an F-15, and a lot of people were saying, boy, the Soviets have really matched us technologically. Then a MiG-25 fighter defected to Japan. We got our hands on one of these things, and we realized it was basically a piece of junk with big engines. This might also be a piece of junk in the shape of one of our stealth fighters. The avionics matter, the skin of the aircraft matters, the jet engines matter. So that's really not you know, I'm less worried about this fighter than I am about the general direction of the Chinese military, and particularly not so much their fielding equipment that looks like ours, but fielding what they call, you know, asymmetrical type equipment that can threaten our carriers, our submarines, our assets deployed in the region.
Well, I think this is a concern because you generally think of these sort of free democratic capitalist versus communist military confrontations as being technology from the capitalist countries against sort of mass brute force numbers on the communist side. That was certainly the Soviet model, but now the Chinese, perhaps with their hybrid, where it has a thriving economy along with this regime, they seem to have a technological edge in some areres, or at least they're competitive.
Well, they're
missiles are an example.
They're competitive in being able to field potentially ship-killing, even aircraft-killing ballistic missiles or high-speed cruise missiles. The U.S. Navy is very concerned specifically about the Chinese missile threat. You'll remember about a year ago, this newspaper had a story about terabytes of data from our F-35 stealth program being stolen, apparently by the Chinese. That might have had some effect on their ability to field this fighter much sooner than, or at least construct this fighter much sooner than we had anticipated. I would expect that the technological edge still ultimately remains with the United States. What China is doing is essentially a copycat. It's the same model that the Soviets were pursuing. What we really need to be concerned about is their ability to field large numbers of things like satellite-killing missiles, ship-killing missiles, very quiet diesel-electric submarines that could make it difficult for us to defend, say, Taiwan, or other areas in the South China Seas in the event of a crisis.
Okay, we'll keep watching that. Thanks, Brett.
First it was a picture, now perhaps a video of what purports to be a Chinese military stealth fighter jet. Welcome to this News Hub Extra. I'm Simon Constable, and joining me on the set we've got Adam Hovarth. We're going to look at this video now with what purports to be, we don't know that it is, but what purports to be a stealth fighter jet. Let's have a look at it and then discuss what we're actually seeing. There it is. What is that?
Well, that purportedly is the Chinese stealth fighter that would compete with the U.S.'s F-22, which is the only fully operational stealth fighter in the world right now, and also the Russian T-50, which is being developed, and India and Russia just signed a deal to develop a stealth fighter together. So China is very quickly trying to join that very small group.
And let's quickly back up and define what stealth fighter means. What's stealthy? What's special about
well,
stealthy?
it's a fifth-generation fighter. So stealth is one aspect of it, and that means that it's designed and specially coded and so forth to avoid radar detection. It also can take off and land very short runways, theoretically, and it, without taking up too much fuel, can fly supersonically. Those three elements make up the fifth-generation fighter.
So fast, undetected by radar, and can land in very short spaces. And we're going to see that video again. Well, what is interesting to me when I looked at that clip was that it's very angular compared to the U.S. Stealth fighter, and the cockpit looks smaller, which suggests that the plane is in fact much bigger than what is the U.S. Stealth fighter.
I don't know if it's bigger. Actually, they all do follow pretty much the same prototype, and there may be some reasons for that. But no, it's very similar actually to the F-22. It's very different from the stealth bomber, which people are maybe more familiar with, which has that kind of like bat wing kind of very smooth look to it. But the fighters that have to be maneuverable, they have to have those angular tail fins, and so it's fairly similar.
It's fairly similar. Maybe I was confusing it there with the bomber. Now, this is purportedly coming out of Chinese bloggers who allegedly surreptitiously shot this video. It's shaky. But there is another theory. What's going on here?
Well, we're not sure how surreptitious all this is, because it seems that since the Chinese censors are not keeping this from getting out on the internet, and apparently there were even military dignitaries visiting and getting their picture taken, that perhaps Beijing is ready for people to know that they have this plane. The timing is interesting because...
And they're not known for slipshod security in general,
No,
are they?
they're known more for very tightly managing what comes out. And so you can suspect that's what's going on here, especially because Robert Gates, the U.S. Defense Secretary, is arriving in Beijing on Sunday for talks about military cooperation. The military ties were cut over arms sales to Taiwan. That gets China very angry, and so they're trying to put back together some talking about military cooperation, and that China would kind of say, hey, we've got this plane just as Gates is coming, makes some sense, especially since Gates actually predicted they wouldn't have the plane for many more years and
so
cut the U.S. funding.
This is like a signaling event that, hey, look what we've got. Now, we haven't actually seen video of it flying. We've seen it taxiing along a runway there.
Right.
And so, I mean, who knows if it can fly. But you said that you saw it with a parachute, would suggest that maybe it was...
There's apparently some pictures with a parachute. It may or may not have taken its first test flights, but that's imminent. And the idea now, there seems to be consensus that it's probably ready to operate if there aren't any problems in the next 8 years or so.
Which is relatively quick.
Yeah, I mean, they'll still be behind Russia, which is already test flying its version, but again, it's a very small group, and the U.S. had predicted, 10 to 15 years, and so slowed down its F-22 program, thinking that we don't have to worry about this for a while, and it looks like China's saying,
maybe you do have to worry.
We're closer than you think.
Well, who knows what the actual truth is, and I'm sure it will come out in the days ahead. Thank you very much, Adam Horvath of the Wall Street Journal. I'm Simon Constable, and this is the Wall Street Journal Digital Network.
Emerged. And what's interesting is that the fighter is kind of taxiing for takeoff, and this has defense experts really buzzing, and they view it really as one of the first authentic looks at how much progress the Chinese have been making.
And this is part of what's assumed to be a Chinese military build. Thank you for joining us.
Of course.
So this is what appears to be a new fighter jet. What do we know about it?
Well, over the past few days, online on some defense-related sites, a picture of China's stealth fighter, one that's been rumored to be under development, having
in the spotlight, a new Chinese stealth fighter jet. At least that's what it appears to be. Welcome to this News Hub Extra. I'm Simon Constable. Joining me on the set, we've got Rebecca Blumenstein, foreign editor with the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much. By governments, and in fact, not a lot is known about our own stealth fighters. But what do we know about this one, or what do we almost know?
Well, there's a lot that we don't know. It's probably several years from being operational. The Chinese are still believed to be behind the Russians, but it seems that it's taking off, and
is that correct?
Yeah, this is likely to heighten sensitivities about China's military buildup. Really, the U.S. is the only country that has an operational stealth fighter at this point. So if the Chinese were to succeed here, it could really alter the balance of power in Asia.
Now, what do we know about this stealth fighter? I know that these things are kept very secret.